All right. All right, so this is better? All right, I think first of all, I'd like to thank everybody for coming down to discuss the elected presidency. I think it's definitely a very pressing issue. I'm a fairly new face here, so I suppose I'd introduce myself. I'm Sean Francis, and I manage a page called Wake Up Singapore and its website. So, there were several proposed changes to the elected presidency. I think the most, or at least the one that stood out to me the most, was that of minority representation. The thing that I find very funny about this is that one out of 7 of our presidents, we've had 7 presidents so far, 1 of 7 of them was a Malay, 2 out of the 7 were Indian, 5 out of 7 Chinese. Okay, and this is something that almost mirrors Singapore's population with the 70% Chinese and with our minorities in the specifics and placements that they should be in. So I found it was quite odd. Who exactly was complaining about minority representation within the presidency? It's not addressing the systemic racism that exists in the country. Okay? It's a ridiculously trivial and meaningless change. And I'd say a very familiar piece of tokenism from the PAP. Okay? Why is the government not talking about things like non-discrimination laws that would protect minorities from being fired from their workplace on the basis of race? Why are we not talking about media representation of minorities? Just a few weeks ago, Toggle aired a little skit with a man in blackface. And earlier this year, a survey was done by CNA and IPS, which showed that only 59% of Singaporean Chinese would find a Malay president acceptable. 59%, that's barely over half. The thing that I want to stress is that forced minority representation will not solve anything. It is dealing with the symptoms of the problem, but not with the problem itself. The problem is systemic, institutional, and societal. And you're putting up tokens, such as saying that, oh, let's have a minority president every 6 terms or every 30 years. It's a blatant disregard for the key and core problems that we have. Another thing that I find very odd is that there's not really been any racial problems with the presidency, so to speak. And we're being offered a token here. Minorities are being offered a token here. I'd like to see that maybe some sort of minority change or minority representative change be proposed for the position of the Prime Minister. 3 of whom, all of whom, have been Chinese thus far. Perhaps that might set us in standard straight. Now, the next major change was that a president can only, an individual can only qualify for being a president should he be the most senior manager in a company with a shareholders' equity of at least $500 million. Why? I was quite curious myself, so I went to look through the white paper. I think it was 134 pages long. No answer. You know, for almost every other point, you find a certain rationale. The government accepts this based on this. No, I was very confused myself. Where was the reasoning for having somebody with a company of $500 million? The closest thing I found to an answer was the economic landscape has changed greatly, quote unquote, okay? Which is kind of strange because you're not really managing anything to do with economics as a president. Like, I suppose that you have a second key, wouldn't necessarily say that that has to do with economics. So what I find very strange is it's an absurd obsession with business over ground-up movements. GDP over the welfare of our most vulnerable. And I wonder, why should the figurehead of our country, as they say the president is, why should the figurehead of our country be held up for his ability to make money? Why can't I have a figurehead who spent years working in civil society? Or why can't I have a figurehead who spent his life combating racism or inspiring change? Why should I have a Trumpish businessman as my figurehead representing me to the international community? Why should I have that? Why is that something that we hold as an ideal? Okay? It's the same logic that's inspired the rise of people like Trump. And the proposed reinforcements just reinforce this very Trumpish logic that money talks and money should have a leg in with politics. Yeah. So these are the two major things that a lot of people have been talking about, but there was one other change that I found quite notable and quite frightening, which is that the president now has to consult the CPA, the Council of Presidential Advisors, from all monetary issues and key public service appointments. It's one of the issues that was overlooked, but I argue one of the most damning as well. Now, the rationale that they gave for this was that a president who indiscriminately or unwisely exercises these custodial powers could cause serious damage to a nation, and that the risk might not sufficiently be appreciated by those who advocated a lowering of the eligibility criteria or who expressed opposition to revising the criteria. Quote unquote, that's their reasoning for it. Okay? What's so damning about this? Well, I think the first thing that comes to mind is that a revival of Ong Teng Cheong's inquiry for transparency is now made far more difficult. The dream that some observers have that the president could bring good men in or cause the slightest diffusion in the groupthink of the PAP is now infinitely out of reach. The president could have been an amazing check and balance on the for Singaporean voters. The opposition, I think, to some Singaporeans could be frightening, could be a little bit out of touch, out of reach, whatever they say, because of their radical proposals for change. But the president does not have or make these kinds of radical proposals. A president can inspire change by his position as a figurehead of the nation and can serve as an equal force to the government in service of checks and balances. The sad truth is that with these changes, with this new idea that the president has to consult with the CPA on every little issue, really takes away that pipe dream that I think some of us had, that he could have, helped to check on some things. So what are the implications of all this? In 1991, the government introduced an amendment which would give the president the second key to the nation's past reserves. And this was used by the late Ong Teng Cheong. Now, Ong Teng Cheong's efforts were blocked in a very laughable way, with a very laughable statement that it would take 56 man-years to do a dollar and cents count of this, of the nation's past reserves. Okay. But while there was no, I suppose, direct fruition of Ong Teng Cheong's efforts, it did inspire a wave. It did inspire this need, this want, this desire for more transparency with our money, this desire for inquiry of our government for the Singaporean voters. Tan Cheng Bock, as well, I suppose the man of the hour, lost the presidential election by 0.35% of the popular vote. 0.35%. And he was cited by many critics as being the subject of these new amendments. I say that this is true and untrue. Tan Cheng Bock would have been in a fairly good position to contest in the next presidential elections due to the PAP's 2015 general election win. Okay? During the 1997 financial meltdown, Tan Cheng Bock stated that Singapore government should tone down its calls for the recruitment of foreign talent and reassure Singaporeans that Singaporeans came first. He was served a stern rebuke from LKY. He voted against the NMP system, this disaster of political maneuvering, and was given yet again another warning for flouting the party whip system. So we're looking at a man here who's not really afraid to go against the party, who's not afraid to step out when he's in the minority, to speak out against things that are disastrously bad. But I don't think that Tan Cheng Bock is the only one. I think there are many other men within the sphere of the PAP who would do the same. And I think a quick look to Ong Teng Cheong and Inderjit Singh points out that such men do exist. The thing here is that it's not directly blocking Tan Cheng Bock. He may be the most immediate, but there are also many like him. The changes are set to block men like him, not specifically and not only him. So I sort of like to round up here with some strange arguments that I suppose our friends at FAP or other PAP apologist sites have been sort of putting out. So they say that when we talk about the elected presidency, I suppose what we're doing now, when we do this, we're somehow politicizing the presidency. So first of all, how is politicizing something inherently dirty? I'd like to ask that. Why is politicizing or speaking about politics somehow a dirty thing in Singapore? Every facet of our lives is inherently political. In any situation where there is a social group, where there is power, where there are resources to be divided, where there are goals or tasks, desires, wants, needs, hopes, dreams, fears, anything like that, any facet of human life is political. So I do not understand the statement when you say that we're politicizing it, as if that's a filthy word. And secondly, you're telling me not to politicize an elected position which works in tandem with the government and is one of the major branches of government. I think it is innately political. How could I not politicize it? How could I not speak about it as if it were a political issue? And next off, they say that Tan Cheng Bock is power hungry, that he sits around sort of hoping for the next presidential election, trying to get himself elected. But let's look at this rationally. Let's look at this argument rationally, okay? If a man were truly power hungry, would he not take the most direct route to power? Why would he oppose the most politically powerful, the group that has had a monopoly on our political power in Singapore? Why would he oppose them and then try to take this back-end route into power? That makes no sense. You know, why would you oppose the powerful to try to become powerful? That makes no sense at all. The thing is, if you believe, as some PAP apologists do, that Tan Cheng Bock was intentionally blocked by the changes, and that this is somehow a good thing, then I have no words left for them. I have no words left for these people. That has to be one of the most undemocratic ideas, one of the most undemocratic, fascistic, dictatorial, disgusting, reprehensible statements that I've ever heard in my life. That you could somehow, on a whim, block a certain group of people just because they opposed you, just because they thought that they could stand out against you and give an idea that was contrary to yours. Just because of these things, you think that it's all right to block a person. That I have no words left for you, and you don't deserve to be living in a democratic society, frankly. And the last thing they say is that we're leveraging on racial issues. We're making a big deal out of it to smear the government somehow. As if as a minority, me speaking out about minority issues was somehow subversive or a bad thing, or that would use this to, smear the government, I think minorities are just fed up of having a government offer us worthless tokenisms. While societal and systemic racism runs rampant, runs free, runs unchecked, runs unabolished. Where is the minority representation, I ask, for the Prime Minister? I think we're not stupid. Minorities are not stupid. Singaporeans are not stupid. The tokenism is not something that minorities in Singapore can't see. Minority representation is not a bunch of ministers in parliament running around in saris. It's not them holding up a radish and saying Happy Deepavali. It's none of these things. It's trying to address the problems, the root of the problem. The root of, I hate to use the phrase, but Chinese privilege. The root of majoritarian privilege. Okay? I think minorities are finding that we're constantly being played off with cheap gimmicks by the PAP and then spoken down to, and whenever we try to raise the issues of minority representation. And that's all I have to say. I think thank you very much.